Hey, what's up, Next Level crew? Welcome back to another episode of What's Your Next. And today we're going to be covering a part one of a three-part series. The three parts are dealing with fear, funding, and familiarity during the process of acquiring a franchise. Today we're going to be covering the topic of fear.
Welcome to What's Your Next. This is the go-to podcast for aspiring business owners who want to get to the next level, escape the rat race, and give their middle finger to the corporate 9-to-5. If you want financial freedom, work-life balance, and the business of your dreams, you're in the right place. Dave and Stacy Riska, husband-wife franchising duo, openly share their successes, failures, and lessons learned in franchising, business ownership, and working with your spouse.
We're going to start off with fear. What do people fear when buying a franchise?
Fear, the four-letter word. Yeah.
Another one.
Let's start by addressing what fear is. And fear is nothing more than false evidence appearing real. False evidence appearing real. And so, Dave, what do you think some reasons are that candidates might be fearful of buying a franchise?
I think the biggest fear probably is dealing with security, particularly if they're coming out of a situation where they're working for a company or they're employed and they're coming out and wanting to be their own boss and business owner. And I think one of the biggest fears related to that has to be that loss of security that they've had for a long period of time.
Yeah. Now, we've talked to a lot of people who are exploring franchise ownership, and the most common fears we come across, the fear of failure, like what if I do it and I fail? The fear of debt, I don't want to borrow money or I don't want to lose money. And then the whole fear of the unknown. This is a business I know nothing about. So here's what we want you to know. Actually, if you're not experiencing fear as you go through the process of learning about and exploring franchises, then something's wrong. We want you to have fear.
Yeah, I would be dead shocked if at some point, no matter what your past experience has been, even if you're a previous business owner, you've owned other businesses, when you're making a decision that, number one, requires you to write a check for, in most cases, over 6 figures, you're going to have some fear. That's just going to happen. So I think the best thing we can do here today to kind of accentuate this topic a little bit is to talk about some of the fears we had when we acquired our franchise 17 years ago. So Stacy, why don't you tell them a little bit about what we went through fear-wise during that process?
Yeah, we had fear. We were both coming from another business and that we had started from scratch. And we kind of knew like a franchise might be a better way to go because it had a proven system behind it. But we were still fearful. And we were looking at a Hawaiian-themed coffee smoothie business, but we had decisions to make because, in this franchise, you have to decide up front how big how many units or how big of a territory do you want? In our concept, we could either go with a 3-pack or we could decide to go big and go with a 10-pack, And remember that, Dave? We were kind of like, well, the investment was $30,000 for a 3-pack or $50,000 for a 10-pack. And so I remember you having some sleepless nights about writing a check for $50,000, right?
Yeah, lots of zeros back then, that's for sure. So that wasn't my biggest fear, though. That's the interesting thing was, yeah, the money was a fear. Cutting that check was a fear. I think it was fear of failure. I really do. I was going into it like, I knows nothing about food service. What if we just fall flat on our face? We were trusting that a franchise was a proven concept. Doesn't matter. You still got to go out and execute. And what happens if we didn't execute? So that was my biggest fear, I think, was the fear of failure. So it gives you some examples just directly from our past experience of the types of fears that you're going to go through when you're thinking of acquiring a franchise. So how can potential franchisees overcome these fears?
You're right. So you got to get past it. There's good fear, which lights a fire under your tush, so you're going to take action. And then there's bad fear, which can hold you back. So the way you get through the fear, number one, work with us, right? Because we're going to give you a process and a framework to help you through it. But it really relates all to education, because you should be basing your decision on a franchise on logic, on data, on facts, on information from the FDD versus emotion. Right, Dave?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so we have a framework that we use to guide you through that process so you can check the boxes and make sure you're making an informed decision. We call it the 6 Ps, and we don't have time to cover that today, but if you'd like to see a copy of that framework, just reach out to us. We're happy to share it.
So finally, now that we've talked about fear being one of the biggest reasons why a lot of people never acquire a franchise, are there any other words of advice or takeaways that you can share with our listeners that might help them get past this?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We talked about education. So I would say read some books, listen to podcasts, watch some videos about people who have gone into business and or success. Because Dave and I will both tell you, you will never meet a successful business owner who hasn't dealt with fear, who hasn't fallen on their face, yet found a way to overcome it. So read about them, learn about them, and be inspired by them. Another piece of advice is do your due diligence. Talk to other franchisees because they know what a day in the life is like. They have been through the process of fear. So talk to them, understand how they overcame it, if they had any challenges in getting up and running and or growing and scaling. You'll get a lot of insightful feedback from that. Remember, the point of a franchise is that it's a system that allows you to be in business for yourself, not by yourself. The third piece I would leave you with is remember what Dave always talks about, which is your why. And when you work with us, we're going to help you get clarity on your why. And when you are clear on that and you match it to a franchise that checks all the boxes, you should not have a lot of fear because then you're making that decision based on facts, not emotion.
Absolutely. Great points, Stacy. Great points. I think the most key point from what you had said there is during your due diligence phase, make sure you ask the other franchisees that you talk to some of the fears they had before they got started. And I think those answers will help appease some of that fear you could be having at that point if you've made it that far. So today we've covered fear. We're going to move on to funding and we're going to move on to familiarity. Before we wrap up, my biggest fear is that you aren't going to like and subscribe. So click the subscribe, click the thumbs up button. We'll catch you on the next episode of What's Your Next?